Thank you for staying with the Monday Report. You're just in time for the town hall session where we said we're giving you back the microphone. We'd like to hear from you. 71 days to go to the polls. IEBC has cut down the number of presidential aspirants from 55 to 18, yet to be cleared. That number may go even lower than that. But are Kenyans getting the options they deserve on the ballot? That's the question you're asking. You're Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. Let me introduce my guest real quick. Beginning from my left, Jerotich Sei is here. She likes to call herself active citizen. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you.
Wanjiru Gikonyo is also here, National Coordinator TISA, which is the Institute of Social Accountability. Asante sana for making time. Let's start off with the latest, Jerotich. And IEBC now says there may have been a system breach whereby some voters were transferred to different places without the statutory documents. Are you confident that IEBC can conduct a credible poll in the next 71 days?
Well, since the sticky little matter of the servers a few years ago, my confidence, greatly waned when it comes to IEBC. And it is not surprising, but definitely worrying that there's been a breach. And so I was actually thinking to myself, I need to go and check again to see whether I am really on the register and where I'm actually voting. So this is the beginning of what I see as a slippery slope of errors and missteps that will lead potentially to chaos come August the 9th. And, I really hope that IEBC has the ability and the capacity to rein in these problems. But if you already have breaches at this point in time, 70 days before, yeah, it speaks of things to come.
Yeah. Wanjiru, does it weigh your confidence? Does it lower it a bit? Or do they still have enough time to fix it? I mean, 71 days from now, they haven't cleared the register. KPMG still checking the audits.
Well, they don't have a choice. They have to fix it.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with Jerotich. We had a civil society engagement end of last week.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came out really strongly is that we're going to write to the IEBC to ask them their status of preparedness. How well have they responded to the issues that emerged from the annulment of the presidential result?
Yeah.
Because there were a number of recommendations made, and the IEBC has not, come out clearly to say their status. How well prepared is the electronic voting system, which is fraught with challenges? What system are we using? It's not clear. Of course, the IEBC has not been fully constituted for the longest while. So, we have a very unfortunate situation where, as Jerotich says, the lack of legitimacy of the elections is likely to trigger chaos.
Yeah.
And so it will be very unfortunate if they don't respond quickly, respond clearly, and restore the confidence that is required for due process.
Yeah, but Jerotich, does this give credence to what the Kenya Kwanza team has been saying? They've been alleging that there is a plot to regain any preferred candidates.
Well, I guess it would lend credence to that, but Kenya Kwanza or anybody else should be extremely concerned about the potential for rigging. If you have weak systems, systems that can be breached that easily, then it's very possible for mischief to be afoot one way or another, as we saw in 2017, as we saw in 2007, which resulted in the most horrific post-election violence. So I think Kenya Kwanza has a basis for concerns. I'm not sure what Azimio la Umoja has said, but on the other hand, Kenya Kwanza presidential candidate says he will accept the results. So it's, for me, an interesting one, because if you're afraid of rigging, but you're going to accept the results, how do you overcome and circumvent whatever might be going wrong? I think the point here is that we have lost a lot of confidence and faith in IEBC, and IEBC needs to do something really quickly. I think a couple of months ago, I tweeted asking about some secret server hub, some facility somewhere in Nairobi, and it raises those questions saying, so what's going to happen there? Is that a place where you're storing data? Is that a place where data will be manipulated? Ultimately, as Kenyans, when I'm going on the 9th of August to cast my vote, am I sure that when I cast my vote, it will actually count?
Yeah.
And these are now the things that lead to voter apathy, outbursts of violence, or the endless litigation that happens after such elections. So really, IEBC has its work cut out for it, and If they're not capable, then we really have to ask ourselves as Kenyans.
Yeah.
5 years on, since 2017, we're still not able to have a smooth process run and led by the IEBC leading up to the election.
Yeah. Wanjiru, some of the things they're raising in the Kenya Kwanza team, before we talk about the Azimio team, is that there are some state officers that have been seen to be partisan. Is that a point of concern, considering some of them may have a bit of clout in different places?
Of course it's a point of concern. And of course it's a violation of the law. And it's an issue that's actionable, and action should be taken. And of course it's, you know, some state officers at the highest level have been using state resources. Now, the unfortunate thing is, apart from preparedness of the election, there's also the conduct around the campaigning that needs to be reined in. In normal circumstances, you would have the National Commission on Human Rights keeping a very close watch on that. You would have, of course, the National Cohesion Commission also keeping a very close watch. The unfortunate thing is, because of the conduct of the Jubilee administration, these institutions have been greatly weakened.
Yeah.
Appointments have been done in a very partisan manner. Resources are not availed in good time. So there's really been a gutting out of the Chapter 15 institutions that safeguard our democracy, including the IEBC,
yeah.
The delays in the appointments, and the kind of political back and forth around the appointments when they were eventually done. So we're not in a good position. We shouldn't be in this situation, and it behooves the political parties on both sides to engage with the IEBC in very serious terms and not politic around the issue. Because there's a sense where a political party can run the politics so that if the result doesn't go well, you can fall back on the politics. But political parties have a duty to engage. There's a framework that was set up, and of course there was some criticism around the role of the judiciary in this joint task force, they were calling themselves, to ensure that the election preparedness and the process is managed properly. So political parties owe Kenyans a duty to hold the electoral body to account, as civil society continues to do so through bodies like ELOG, through the, we have the Angaza movement that is monitoring and holding to account. So no, let's not leave room for doubt. Let us push. We have court processes should we feel that they're not pulling their weight. But indeed, this is not it's not a comfortable place to be. We shouldn't be here this late in the game. And you know, we put that at the feet of the administration, and of course an opposition that joined ranks with the administration and forgot to hold the administration to account.
But Cherotich, is this a real point of concern, or is it just a concern that is being raised because the shoe is on the other foot?
Whose foot? Because they're the same.
It's the same government.
Same
they're
government.
Complaining about the system. These are the people they chose. Is it now they're just complaining because these people are not supporting them? Because this was a collective decision to have these people in place, including the members of parliament who had to vet the CSS, who then came into place.
Of course, there's always going to be an element of that. So it doesn't matter whose foot the shoe was. No. Which way are we looking at it? It will always happen that you will have one group saying, no, we're being picked on, we're being pushed back against, we're being, deliberately targeted and so on. So it tends to happen that way. But I think we have to fall back to process. And what is the process around the selection, approval, and moving forward of these candidates? And if we had procedures that were followed to the T, but today we've seen already with some of the fracas we're seeing at Bomas that procedures don't seem to be followed, or they're followed for one group of people but not for another group of people. For me, Reuben Kigame is a very good example today, where he had done everything he needed to do, but at the end of the day, he wasn't allowed. He wasn't allowed to move forward. So you have to ask yourself, why do certain rules apply to certain groups of people and not to others? So those concerns are legitimate, perhaps along partisan lines, but across the board, it's a concern. Will something be weaponized against me because I'm in the wrong camp? Or will procedure always be followed, and I can be sure that it will be transparent, it will be procedural within the confines of the law and according to what I would expect in terms of fairness of process.
Yeah, but critics would say that the process itself is the reason why they're sort of sifting the chaff from the wind, because if they need 48,000 votes from more than half, which is 24 counties, and we had 55 presidential aspirants, that's not a ballot paper, it's a ballot book.
You see, the 55 for me says something interesting about what's happening in Kenya today. Yeah. I call myself an active citizen because I say I can sit quietly in my house or in my place of work, my place of business, and mutter under my breath, complain, and insulate myself to the extent possible from the problems that come with being a Kenyan, or I can speak up and out. So for me, the 55, it's actually encouraging that you have these Kenyans who have said, I want to offer myself up for leadership. But I suppose you also have to have regulations, because practically 55 candidates this is just not practically possible. But it is not to say that the 55 who wish to offer themselves out and up for leadership are wrong. I applaud them. And I've spoken to a few of them. Of course, it's whittled down to two major, it's always been seen as a two-horse race, but we've had other serious contenders, across the board, and people whose ideas I would like to listen to. Because for me, anybody who has Wanjiku at his or her heart, I will listen to them. I will give them my ear. I will try to understand where they're coming from and see, does this person offer me what I need as a Kenyan? So the 55 should not be, it's not so much that for me the regulations are overly stringent. I think you do have to have those signatures from across X number of counties. This is normal, this is procedural, but it is extremely expensive. And when you have to photocopy front and back of an ID and then verify them, make sure, it really makes it look like if Cherotich was offering herself up, I'll give up before I've started because I may not have the resources, financial or otherwise, to get all of that done. Yeah. So when people have gotten this far, it behooves the IEBC to behave in a procedural manner and give them their day in court, so to speak, and allow them to present. And if they're not going to go through, they have to be clearly told why. And that's why I come back to Ruben and I say it's not fair what has happened. In my opinion, it's not fair. And we have civil society that then should be speaking up and out. As you were saying, there's so many bodies that should be watching and providing. It's the political parties, but also civil society. I want to hear what they're saying about people like Ruben Kigame who have been blocked out. Or should we have a sliding scale if you're not that prominent? Because it's very easy for Azimio la Umoja and for Kenya Kwanza to gather those 2,000 plus, because they have the resources. They are a massive, massive entity. So it's a bit skewed. Yeah. It's a bit skewed in favor of those with the resources. But I would still want to come back and say the fact that we have 55 is indicative of where we're at as Kenyans. I applaud them, but I know that not all 55 will make it through, definitely not. And I hope that those who are being treated unfairly, it's not a weaponization of the power that IEBC has to make sure that certain parties don't sail through, and then you're faced with too many options. I think it's always been narrowed down to it has to be an Azimio la Umoja and a Kenya Kwanza final race. Yeah. And I wish we could think a little bit more broadly and widely than that as Kenyans.
Wanjiru, do you think the race to State House is a rich person's game, so to speak?
When we were working on the Constitution, there was a lot of discussion around the various provisions, around the electoral system, around the devolved system. And I remember being in a forum where we had a conversation and somebody brought, a different perspective, because obviously we were looking at the governance, we're looking at the accountability, ensuring that you try and have an inclusive system. And the perspective he brought in is that elections in Kenya have become very expensive. Presidential elections have become, a rich man's game, a rich person's game, but also a big driver of corruption. Because where are you going to get the resources to drive the type of elections that you need? One, to get this base, the requirements. Two, to build up the momentum, to do the messaging. So our whole electoral process has really requires a rethink. And much as we challenge the BBI, because the BBI process was not premised properly. It wasn't initiated properly. It didn't represent, the public participation, and some of the issues were framed politically instead of in terms of the real need. We do need to look at our electoral process. Yeah. And yes, indeed, our elections are driving corruption. And unfortunately, this has become a cycle not only at the presidential level, also at the county level. This has to do with the process that is very expensive, that is very exclusive, as opposed to inclusive, that locks out alternative and valid thought, that doesn't reward leadership, but is also a factor of our culture, our political and electoral culture that we need to deal with. Yeah. So yeah, definitely it's a rich man's game. In the case of IEBC and their vetting role, we've seen them implement these roles with a lot of vigor and gusto. We wish they'd do the same around integrity. Mm-hmm. And we've had to go to court on that as civil society, saying that, we need to get people on the ballot who have a clean record, who haven't been cited in government reports for abuse of office, for human rights and criminal violations, for abuse of funds and other violations. On that front, the IBC has been very reticent. The EACC has also been reticent. So yes, it's great to implement administrative rules, but we have to remember the Constitution was crafted with a spirit to transform Kenya, to transform the way we do our things. And the Chapter 15 institutions are charged with embodying that spirit. So I wish the IEBC would implement the provisions on integrity with the vigor it is these administrative requirements. I think in terms of the number of candidates and the cost of elections, we haven't enacted the regulations around campaign financing. In fact, it's unfortunate that discussion is off the table around these elections. Civil society has consistently fought and advocated around this, and we didn't get it passed through Parliament because Parliament was pocketed by the executive and calculated, well, if we pass very stringent campaign financing rules, where are we going to get the money to campaign? So instead, what Parliament has done is pass laws that benefit themselves, whether it's the CDF and the other legislative funds, which are in effect slush funds. So yes, our elections are not supportable. They've become a driver of corruption. They've become, there are perverse incentives by our legislators to, undermine the governance system. And, CDF being the biggest example, but there are also other funds that are used by sitting MPs and sitting legislators to popularize themselves. And you can say that that's an unfair advantage for an incoming for an aspirant who doesn't have a CDF kitty, who doesn't have a women's fund, campaigning against somebody who's essentially using public resources to profile themselves. So, a lot to unpack, but for now, I think it's focusing on the electoral integrity of the elections and the legitimacy of the elections.
Jeritich?
I was just seeing one of the dailies today, issues for Kenyans. They talk about cost of living. I'm a Kenyan, talk about cost of living, unemployment, crime and insecurity. Look at the 3 children who were shot dead in Kerio Valley. I'm from Elgeyo-Marakwet County yesterday. You look at the issues of poor governance, bad politics, poverty. You see, at the end of the day, we can get into the nitty-gritties of institutions and how they're functioning and what needs to happen and some of the backroom machinations that result in what we have today, including a vast majority of the rich actually running today using public resources, using my resources, your resources, and we're not challenging that. How do you campaign using a CDF vehicle or a government vehicle? How does, for example, maybe Office of the President fund certain aspects of the campaign? How do you see people in the executive engage in active politicking? So you see, for the average Kenyan, corruption is a key thing indeed. And of course, the fight against corruption is weaponized. You see the battles between DCI and ODPP, and you wonder, when will this all stop? And if you look at it, it's a slippery slope. On the one hand, you have the debate around personalities and the integrity, and do they embody the Chapter 6 spaces, and are they fit for purpose? Are they able to run this country and lead us? On the other hand, people are saying, we're poor. I can't pay my electricity bill. I don't have money for food. I can't afford my matatu fare because the cost of fuel has gone up. Yeah. So for me, in terms of even moving forward into these last 70 days before the elections happen, I would like to see, finally, those who are campaigning move away from the politics of personality, because perfection is the enemy of good. All of them, bar none, are ultimately not without blame. Okay. There's always something you'll pick out about somebody who did what there, embezzled these funds. You want to talk about Western Hotel, or you want to talk about 35 billion shillings inappropriately used in the Prime Minister's office, and this was raised in the presidential debate in 2013. At any point, it'll be a slippery slope of a debate of, then it becomes who is more corrupt, or who is most corrupt, who has the least integrity. When Kenyans, I think, Wanjiku needs to have these people who wish to lead us make a pact with us, an MOU with us, these famous manifestos that are spoken of, but where was the manifesto launched? I've seen the 10 points of Azimio. I've heard about the bottom-up economic model. We, as Wanjiku, need to hear them tell us when government services will be restarted, when institutions are going to function. Corruption, we can talk about it forever, but if institutions are not strengthened, for example, Nancy Gathungu, the Auditor General, is regularly telling us how many billions were stolen here, how many billions were stolen there. At the end of the day, not a single person is behind bars. So for Wanjiku, it boils down to, what are you going to give me tomorrow? And how are you selling yourself? Because talk is cheap across the board. But we know, and even those of us in the fundraising space, when you write proposals, you have to be most convincing in order to attract the interest of that person who would fund whatever you're doing. Yeah. And that's the same for these parties, these leaders. They need to move away from all the Cambridge Analytica style back and forth and personality crushing and bashing and ethnic profiling and every single thing, to actually telling me why you want me to vote for you. And I think...
You haven't had any of that?
I have, in bits and pieces from various sides. You know, the 10 points of Azimio, really, you know, interesting. But when I dig deeper, I'm like, where is the flesh behind that? Yeah. Well, you could argue that Kenya Kwanza has taken a lot of time, and even the economic forums that are happening around the country, taken a lot of time to engage with this idea of the economy and what it is that everybody wants from the bottom up. So you could say, and I have said it, and then of course I'm ethnically profiled as being Kalenjin, therefore I could only be in UDN, I could only be in Kenya Kwanza. I mean, shock on Kenyans. We have a right as Kenyans to choose who we would like to have lead us, and for me, it will be based on the issues that you raise, how clearly you articulate them, and whether you're actually coming to Wanjiku and not the other way around. Yeah, so it's a combination of that versus making sure that the bedrock, the IEBC and those systems are functioning correctly, or else it is a recipe for disaster. Yeah.
Wanjiru, before I take a break, have you had any substantive conversation from the perceived front runners that you'd say, okay, well, fine, this is something tangible that Kenyans want to hear?
Of course, we're waiting for the publishing of the manifestos, because we've had a lot of information coming out, and it's coming out in bullet points. What is interesting is, in my view, the parties are now beginning to, the big parties, the two leading contenders, are now beginning to shape their profile. At some point, we felt, both sides look very similar. Yeah. Why? Both sides have their genesis in the Jubilee administration. One has the head of state as the head of the party. The other has the DP as the head of the party. So you're looking and saying, well, are we continuing more Jubilee under a different guise? Now, with the appointment of the selection of the DPs, we begin to see a divide. We've got a party that's now talking governance, that's now talking human rights, if you listen to the language that's coming from Honorable Karua. Of course, we then have the, Kenya Kwanza, doing its own thing. So we are now beginning to see the possibility of having a real conversation between the political parties and Kenyans having to choose. That's exciting. And of course, for us as civil society, we are very keen to hear constitution, rule of law. For us, devolution, respecting the constitution with regard to devolution, not the lip service. Because with the Jubilee administration, if you listen to their to their narrative, they would talk about, we have sent so many trillions into devolution. But when you go into the actual implementation, it's not happening. So I think one of the difficulties that the voter has to contend with is the spin, is the messaging. There's a lot of media, there's a lot of hype. How will the voter decipher this?
Yeah.
And part of what I think we need to do as media and do as civil society is to help the voter unpack this. Because we are hearing a lot of good things on both sides, but do they connect? For instance, when you make economic promises, a lesson we've learned from the 2013 manifesto is that when a party makes a promise to deliver a certain thing, the taxpayer is going to pay. And we are paying very heavily for the Jubilee promises. Of course, those promises were then hiked up with corruption, budgeted corruption. So we are paying for poor governance, but we're also paying for their policy choices. And life has then become impossible. So we need to be sober. And I think it's up to civil society and media to bring that sobriety, because there's a race for the, for their political lives. And in that process, they'll say anything. And you're hearing every day some new statement made. And we need to then say, what are the implications of dismantling this, the CBC, for instance? Is that the way to go? So let us bring sobriety into the debate. Let us force political parties to be accountable. Most importantly, let them speak about who is going to pay. How will they respect the law in implementing these projects? Because we've seen a violation, we've seen development projects that have violated the law in terms of the intergovernmental aspect, in terms of the economic aspect, in terms of the public finance management, public participation. So we do not want development despite the law. We want development within the law that enriches Kenyans and not enriches a few.
Yeah, you wanted to respond to this before I take a break.
Yeah, Shira, I would say, I agree with you that there should be a high level of sobriety, and civil society and media, you both have a role. And I would like to then urge that sobriety is also non-partisan. Because the minute the sobriety is equated with a level of partisanship, then of course, eventually civil society will paint itself into a corner. We know what happened back in 2002, will paint itself into a corner that it doesn't want to be in. When you begin to equivocate in a way and say yes, and then the slant starts moving in a particular direction, and if we can be, quite clear, I saw the meeting that Angaza, Okwa Uchumi, and so on had with the deputy presidential, the running mate for Raila Odinga, senior counsel Martha Karua, who is a friend of mine. We're in Linda Katiba together. I have a lot of respect for her. It begins to kind of slant civil society in a particular direction. I look forward to Angaza and Okwa Uchumi also having a similar meeting with Rigathi Gachagua and seeing what it is that Kenya Kwanza and also Reuben Kigame and anybody else who is running, so that civil society does not find itself in a position where it's unable to maintain the hygiene in political spaces. Because once you find yourself kind of slanting towards one particular party, when that party wins, or if that party wins, how can you ever speak up against it? like I say, think back to 2002, what actually happened when civil society then, was adrift for years and is only or had only started to find itself again. And I fear that if civil society takes a partisan approach to the elections of 2022, we are in trouble, because finally this will not be about Wanjiku.
Yeah.
And it has to be about Wanjiku. It has to be about our ability to explain to Wanjiku, or Wanjiku herself listening to what it is that those who would lead us are going to do for her. And by Wanjiku, I'm not referring to a homogenous group. We are a heterogeneous society. Kenya is one, but we are from all walks of life. And it is really about, when you are speaking, Right Honorable Raila Odinga, is what you're saying resonating with me? Or when you're speaking, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, is what you're saying resonating with me? Do I believe that you have the ability? Yes, there's all of that budgeted corruption. We're dealing with Fuliza loans from China and everywhere. We shall never finish paying all of these things. And whenever there's an opportunity to borrow money, boom, there we are again borrowing money. So some of these things will have to change no matter who wins come August 9th, so that even if their commitments to revive the economy, to transform, to do the bottom up, or to do 6,000 to every household to make sure that people can come up, we have to make sure that doesn't go hand in hand with budgeted corruption. But mine is back to media, civil society. That sobriety has to be absolutely non-partisan.
Wanjiru, have you taken sides as a civil society?
Yes, we've taken sides. We take sides with the Constitution.
Okay.
So anyone who stands on the Constitution and on the issue they stand with, we are with them. We were with the, we can say...
Azimio la Umoja.
No, with the and I'm trying to think whether it's correct. In our BBI suit, we were with the supporters of the BBI suit. Why? Because we had a common interest, the Constitution. So yes, civil society, in my view, will take the side of the Constitution, not necessarily the individual. It is our duty. It is what we stand for, and we will continue to do so. So to the extent that we agree on the issues, we are with you. Not necessarily for campaigning, but for holding you accountable to the promise, for helping you refine your policies. So, no, I think it would be wrong if civil society say, well, we won't engage in politics, we'll wait until after the election. That is foolhardy. In 2013, civil society kept off and decided to leave politics to the politicians. That is not a workable way to run things in Kenya, because politics dictates everything. When we go into parliament, it's politics. So we realized we have to be talking to all sides, and we have reached out to UDA. We actually reached out to UDA first and are hoping to have that conversation. There are a few things we don't agree on, but we believe there are many things we do agree on. And we are all Kenyans. And there's nobody, UDA, Azimio, who will be ejecting themselves from Kenya to go live somewhere else if things go bad. So we want to talk to everyone. We won't agree with everybody. We want to hold them accountable. Also, we are aware as we speak to the deputy, to Martha Karua, as the aspirant deputy president of Azimio, she also has a Herculean task working with the party. So as we discuss and hear good statements she's making, we want to hear those statements coming from the head of the party. And we want to hear those statements also coming from the UDA, from the Kenya Kwanza. So yes, we are partisan. We are partisan with the Constitution, not with individuals and not with political actors. And, you know, no apologies for taking the side of the Constitution. That's why we're here.
I think you can be partisan, you can be political, but non-partisan. And by non-partisan, I'm meaning that you don't seem to be sitting in one political camp versus another, because in the process, because there'll always be X number of Kenyans supporting Azimio la Umoja, X number of Kenyans supporting Kenya Kwanza, X number of Kenyans undecided, X number of Kenyans supporting other candidates, and so on and so forth. So I am highly political myself, but I try to the extent possible to be non-partisan. So I think the difference for me is we can be, civil society can be political, but be as non-partisan as one needs to be in relation to political parties. But partisan, in relation to the Constitution, I'm with you 100%. We're together. We were petitioner, I don't know, 2 or 3 and 4 in the basic structure for that case in court.
Yes,
so I then don't understand the idea that we can't talk to political parties because we're civil society. And we will. And we're talking on issues.
But talk to both.
And we'll talk on issues. And we will be political because
yeah.
we support public participation,
okay.
active citizen. That is politics. So we need to rethink what we call politics.
Yeah.
But I do agree, we do not want to get into partisan party politics.
Okay. That's what I meant.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll take your feedback and then talk about the integrity issue, Chapter 6, really quick, before we wind up. All right, see you in a bit.